We have told people for a long time, you go to university and you get a decent degree, you will get a job. It's just not true.
Do you think a generation or more who have been told education was the key in terms of university, really started by your father's government, well, they sold a pub?
It's panned out as you have lots of graduates who aren't getting jobs, and universities also struggle to keep up with the pace of change. The Industrial Revolution led to the entire creation of the modern schooling system. What is going to be our equivalent response to the AI revolution?
Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Giri-Murthy, and this is the podcast where we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. My guest today believes we're heading for the biggest shake-up in the world of work for generations. As AI redefines our jobs, he argues our education system is no longer fit for purpose, and the traditional path from school to university is failing young people. Euan Blair is the co-founder and chief executive of Multiverse, a company helping employers recruit and train people through apprenticeships and skills-based learning, saying this is the key to thriving in the age of AI rather than being replaced by it. Euan, welcome.
Great to be here.
So if you could change the world in one fell swoop, what would you do?
I would focus on rebalancing our education system away from the academic and towards the applied and vocational. We've sort of allowed the pinnacle of education to be defined by academics and academia, what you know rather than what you can do. And this has become only more urgent with the march of AI because knowledge is being commoditized. You can get access to knowledge from all around the world and throughout history at your fingertips. What really matters is actually, well, what can on a practical level you do with that knowledge? And this is something we're just not teaching in the formal education system. And as a result, we're leaving huge swathes of the population behind.
I mean, so what are the skills that you are filling in? I mean, Multiverse has got contracts with huge numbers of public sector, private sector, different countries. I mean, are you training people to use AI now?
We are.
Because how long will those skills last?
Well, so some things I think are fairly universal. Problem solving, judgment, taste, all of these things, and then actually dealing with the tool itself. But as AI tools become increasingly easy to use, the point is going to be, can you rebuild the way you work around those tools? And how do you maintain human agency and importantly, human oversight over AI tooling? If you think of, many organizations are already beginning to implement and unleash agents on their kind of workforces. How do you make sure that these super intelligent agents are doing the things you want them to do? And this is where training people is the only way you're going to maintain human agency and oversight, but also kind of fill this adoption gap. MIT just released a report saying 95% of companies are seeing no meaningful difference in their P&L due to any of their AI initiatives. And that's because the challenge isn't the technology one, it's a human one of how do you basically implement and adopt this technology at scale.
And you believe there are still going to be what we regard as entry-level jobs, do you, with those kind of fairly basic skills that you're equipping people with, because huge numbers of employers are reducing their postgraduate intake? AI giants are already warning, that they think the workforce is going to be decimated or more. What gives you the confidence that there is still a future for young people? Learning the kinds of skills that you're training, rather than very advanced skills from very, very clever people who are, on the management training scheme and are going to rise to the top.
Yeah, so I don't think we end up in a situation where you have a small number of elites basically running all the jobs in the world and everyone else not working, at least certainly not in the near term. And the other thing is governments are going to regulate against that and try and take steps to make sure that doesn't happen. I think also at the moment, we're not really seeing a fallout in the employment market from AI. Much more what we're seeing is rising cost of employment and tricky macroeconomic environment that are putting a bit of a dampener on hiring. Though we do speak to plenty of employers where they're basically saying we're more cautious about some of our future hiring plans because we think at the moment AI might mean we need fewer employees in the future. And that's really important. But the reality is, if you think we've had this kind of university system that's acted as a gatekeeper around the best jobs, that can now be overcome because people have access to knowledge regardless of their background, so long as you've given them a tool. Then it will be what they do with that knowledge, their understanding, taste, judgment, context, various other things that matter a lot. It also gives us a massive opportunity to retrain people. We work with nurses and doctors, we work with factory workers, we work with people in nearly every part of the economy who have this incredible domain context, and AI really struggles with context, but actually give them a tool like AI, you can kind of supercharge their ability to do things. And once you can do that, you end up having a much less kind of upstairs, downstairs workforce. You can have a much more balanced workforce.
I mean, you've been arguing this for some time.
Yeah.
And before AI became the dominant technology and way of thinking. I mean, do you think, a generation or more who have been told, education was the key in terms of university, had this massive expansion of people going to university. I mean, really started by your father's government, which had this sort of, target of getting 50% of young people into university. I mean, were they sold a pub?
I think the reality is it's panned out as you have lots of graduates who aren't getting jobs. There are no guarantees of employment through universities, and universities also struggle to keep up with the pace of change because often they proudly say they think in decades and centuries. That is really hard when you're living through a kind of revolutionary moment. The Industrial Revolution led to the entire creation of the modern schooling system. What is going to be our equivalent response to the AI revolution? We have to reimagine how people learn at every stage of their lives, and it does have to be lifelong.
But is there something sort of deeper that we need to examine, which is that we're kind of talking about what were the working class. And there was this huge expansion and push to drive skills, to drive education, to give working class kids the dream that they could be middle class, that they could have the same jobs as the bosses and the boss class. And what we are now looking at with AI, it seems to me, is what to do with what were the working class, what to do with the people who aren't going to be like you or me. And we're not really honest about that, are we? That, we're not talking about a classless society in which, everybody can go everywhere. You are talking about what to do with a huge bulk of the country who used to be working class, then became sort of new middle class, and are now wondering what they are going to be.
Well, I think this is changing. I mean, if you look at the sort of prognostications on which jobs are going to be hit hardest by AI, it is knowledge worker jobs, right? Actually, blue-collar jobs are in many ways quite well insulated, and we desperately need more of them in the economy, right? This has been part of the problem as we've turned away from...
So we're still going to need construction
We're still going to need construction, mechanics, engineers. I mean, the reality is we basically ripped out the vocational routes to work in this country and around the world. This has happened in nearly every Western society, certainly. And we thought instead we'll just replace it with academic-only learning. Well, guess what? Things have changed. We now live in a world where, as I said, access to knowledge is super easy and very commoditized. Someone in rural Romania can access through an AI tool the same knowledge as a partner at McKinsey. Now that gives us an opportunity to massively rebalance society, but we're not going to get that right if we don't change the education system. We have an education system that doesn't introduce work skills nearly early enough. Sometimes it doesn't introduce them at all. It doesn't introduce life skills. All of these things are going to be even more important in the AI era. You mentioned before, we were solving this problem before kind of AI was the big thing everyone was talking about. What AI's done is made it so much more urgent, but also more achievable.
And so do you think this applies right across the board? Does it apply to blue-collar jobs? Does the construction worker need new tech skills as much as the nurse?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're working with construction workers in how to actually use AI to do their jobs better and faster, right? You can do lots of things in simulated environments that are much cheaper than having to do them kind of with physical machinery that's hugely expensive. And again, we've built traditional university campuses and college campuses, often at huge expense, that are increasingly outdated. And then blue-collar workers are going to have to adapt to the rise of robots and automation, but they've been doing that for decades, right? In fact, they've been doing it since the Industrial Revolution.
Have you got the right model? Because, I mean, you've had some difficult reports from Ofsted recently about retention on, these apprenticeships. Presumably that's a lot to do with employers. You can provide some framework around it, but employers are not all equipped to do this?
Well, look, I would argue you have a fundamental challenge at basically taking workplace learning and apprenticeships and allowing them to be defined as a kind of component of education rather than a component of employment and progression. So we spent a lot of our time focusing on really three things: promotion prospects, pay increases from learning, and crucially, relevance for what you are learning to the job that the employer has set you, right? An apprenticeship, in theory, should work at its best when there's this alignment between what the employer needs and what the individual is learning. But this is not an academic pursuit.
And employers don't really know that.
Right. One of the things is, if you think of who has the most context in an organization about how work actually gets done, it's the frontline worker. And as you go higher up in an organization, managers, leaders, CEOs often have very little visibility on what their people are working on. And so if you can use the apprenticeship model to train people in a series of projects and use cases that demonstrate they can use their technology to do their job better and faster, you get something incredibly valuable. And it should be striking to everyone that we've had this 20-year relentless march of software tools and technology of nearly every description, and yet workforce productivity has flatlined. Right? Globally, productivity has flatlined in the developed world. And that's because we've not invested in the human component that is actually going to make this technology that is in theory really valuable in practice.
But then how do you solve the problem of you create a load of people with the skills to enter the workforce, but as the march of AI goes on, as you say, it is the middle management layer of a lot of businesses that is being wiped out by AI because it can do a lot of those processing and analysis skills much better or much more quickly than a human being. I mean, aren't we taking out job progression? There's a danger that people will be stuck where they are with basic skills and basic jobs.
Well, I think that will definitely happen if we don't realize that everyone at every age and stage in the workforce should be trained, because if you help people at one level progress upwards, it creates opportunities for those below. One of the challenges at the moment actually is, how do you make sure there are on-ramps for people if people at the kind of early middle level aren't progressing at all? But I think middle managers' roles will change, right? Middle managers do not get a great rap when you speak to most people, but often their job has just been kind of managing processes that are super creaky and don't work particularly well, and occasionally managing people. If you can get to a point where using technology, those processes become automated and easy, they can focus on kind of high value tasks that are actually going to move their organization forward. I mean, we've got to be reimagining work, but I don't think you can do that without reimagining education. And it dismays me that we don't build any muscle in the 4 to 18-year-old education system, or 21, 22 if you go to university, to actually say, how do you solve practical problems? How do you expose people to work earlier? How do you create, for example, with this huge higher education budget, bursaries for people, instead of going to study in academic environments, to actually enter the workplace, could well be unpaid and have their education paid for through their work on the job. We've got to move away from this idea that education is academia, right? And bring education and employment much closer together. People have been saying this for decades, but we've not grasped the nettle. I think AI makes this inevitable, so we've got to move faster.
So it's the school system you've got to
I think that's a massive part of the problem. Yeah, absolutely. The school system was built for the Industrial Revolution, right? Now we're in a completely different era. And the reality is every school is grappling with this. What we can't simply do is just introduce agentic teachers or AI into the classroom, because you're basically automating the same pretty imperfect system, right? Getting to bad results faster isn't all that helpful. The question is, how do you actually introduce life skills, employability skills? How do you get employers' views in the classroom as well? And how do you kind of shape a forward-looking economic model?
Are you teaching life skills in your training? Because I mean, that is what a lot of employers say, the thing that has kind of fallen off a cliff, particularly since COVID.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time doing that, particularly with younger people. We do a lot of community events around things like how to have challenging conversations, how to navigate your early stages in the workplace. I never see our job as just teach someone to pass an endpoint assessment, which is their kind of final apprenticeship exam. That is absolutely something you should do, but it has to, the problem we should be solving is, how do you make someone inherently more valuable to their employer in the workplace and therefore improve their economic circumstances?
How important is your attitude towards work and how that has changed?
So Motivation or intent is still the single biggest defining characteristic in how successful someone is in the workplace. Basically, are they highly motivated? And one of the reasons I'm a big believer, and in our model of instruction, we use human coaches, despite the fact we have a brilliant agentic coach and a great platform, is because human accountability and kind of extrinsic motivation really matters. You might get some of that from your manager, you might get some of that from your parents, you might get some of that from your environment. But if you can have a coach kind of cheering you on and helping you figure things out, it's really, really valuable. But motivation matters massively. And actually, most of the young people we meet are really highly motivated. They do actually want to succeed. You know, there's a lot of nonsense written and talked about that Gen Z don't really care about work. All they care about is work-life balance. We see lots of people who are really serious about work. The challenge is often creating the kind of on-ramps and opportunities for them to display that in work in a way where they're set up for success.
But there is some truth, isn't there, in a world in which people can no longer assume that they get a job in a big business and that they will progress through the ranks and they will naturally earn more money, get more seniority and have a future and a pension. And that inevitably changes the attitude of some of those people, you know, not from what can I possibly do to get on to, well, what's in this for me?
Only if they've been told that's the only route for them, right? And this is part of the problem. Career pathways will not be linear in the same way, and you won't work for one employer doing the same thing for 40 years. But I think those days are long gone in nearly every job, and that's only going to be exacerbated. We don't prepare people for that in school. And again, we have told people for a long time, you go to university and you get a decent degree, you will get a job. It's just not true.
And that's it. And that's the last learning you need to do.
Right, exactly. The idea that's going to see you through to your 70s is just, it makes no sense, and it's just not true. And part of the problem is we've seen actually employer investment in training collapse over the last 10, 15 years outside of government intervention. Because honestly, we've not done enough to kind of make everyone aware of the fact that training is not just a kind of individual employee benefit, but can be a business and organizational benefit. One of the things we spend a lot of our time on is figuring out how do you attach kind of training and education to workplace outcomes like growing revenue, delivering a project faster, things that employers really care about and can get on board with.
So why do you think Britain, you know, not exceptionally, but Britain, because we're here, has not been very good at this big structural change in education? I mean, you know, you have your specialism, but you've also had a ringside seat on politics. You grew up in Downing Street. Your dad's institute is still very engaged with a lot of these issues. I'm sure you talk about this.
We do.
I mean, why do you think we're not very good at this?
I think we've become complacent, in particular because we've had such a successful higher education system in many ways, right? British universities are the envy of the world, and that is a great thing. And we failed to recognize that actually that in and of itself was not going to be sufficient. Of course, you need brilliant academic institutions, but you need really robust vocational pathways. I think also as a consequence of the decline of manufacturing and deindustrialization, we sort of decided vocational training was just for those kinds of jobs, right? If you want to go and work in marketing, why do you need a degree to do that? You could learn that on the job. And the whole on-the-job learning piece has been forgotten. I mean, you wouldn't want a doctor who had only read, you know, they'd read every medical journal in existence. They knew all the theory of how to practice medicine, but never actually interacted with a patient before performed surgery on you, right? This is, we've got to get better at understanding. Learning and application should be two sides of the same coin.
But what I mean is, why do you think politics has failed to tackle this over the last 20 years?
I think it's probably, I think two factors. First, it's not been a sexy enough issue, right? I think it's one of those things where people think, okay, actually vocational education, technical education, the application of learning, we get it's important, but we're not sure it's a burning problem to fix. I think AI will change that really, really fast. And I think the other thing is a lack of kind of political will and ambition around genuine, far-reaching education reforms. Right? When was the last time you heard a Secretary of State for Education say, let's look at the entire system, cradle to grave, and also the school system, and say, if we were going to build this from scratch today, how would we do it?
I mean, isn't that because politicians now are actually a bit, you know, worried about talking about fundamental change, because reorganization of big institutions like the NHS is always really difficult, very controversial, very expensive.
Sure, but the solution can't be we don't ever do it.
No, I know, but I mean, politicians have become a bit afraid, haven't they, of changing. Every time there's a change to the exam system, or you talk about scrapping A levels, it becomes incredibly controversial.
Right.
And so the pace of change becomes very slow.
But the reality is, politics is the art of the possible. You are going to have to upset some people in order to make big change. I think there has been a lack of kind of honesty around the fact that you will need to basically take on established interests in order to do that. And I think the other thing is that, so much of those changes have been presented as big changes, but have been tinkering around at the edges. Right? Like, just introducing T levels as a potential alternative to A levels, but not shaping the education system around it has made it a nod to something that's important, but never actually gone and done the thing. If you went into a classroom in the 1950s and 60s and went into a classroom today, you wouldn't see anything wildly different apart from potentially screens instead of blackboards. But we've not reimagined education. So,
I mean, at the moment, the country is wrestling with the fact that about 1 million young people are NEETs, not in employment, education, or training. And you have this potentially lost generation who are going to find themselves in their 20s with no skills, no work experience, no future. What would you do about it?
Yeah. Well, I would first fund a lot of them, and I would have done this earlier when they were in school, to go and work with employers, right? Employers will
From what age?
From ideally 16 and above, right? I think you need to start it sufficiently early, but you should have robust technical pathways preparing people for work long before then, from the age of 12 onwards. Primary school, you get your foundational knowledge base. Secondary school, you build upon it. You still have academic routes, but there have to be vocational routes. We spend a lot of money subsidizing some not very good universities to put people on courses where they're probably never going to get a job out of it. If instead we use that money to provide a massive wage subsidy to actually take people on, so effectively it's free for employers, right? You are paying as an individual through your labor, but also the education you're receiving, because it's still education, learning on the job. Very similar to how students actually end up paying for their education. You'd have a much more balanced system. And the reality is, we'll still have people going through the academic system it will suit, and you'll have people going through a vocational system who will thrive in that environment, and both can be employed, and employers will embrace both. I mean, we work with plenty of employers who dropped degree requirements because they realized it was barely a proxy for intelligence and certainly not a proxy for output.
So should we just close a load of universities, do you think, when you talk about not very good universities?
Yeah, I think there probably are some that should be closed, but you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We've got some brilliant academic institutions, but I think we need to hold them to account around employment outcomes, right? What if you were going to sell yourself as the kind of last mile before work, which, by the way, they shouldn't be, then let's actually evaluate how many people are going into jobs where they can ever repay their fees.
But there was this massive expansion of universities. The polytechnics became universities.
Yep.
And, as you say, I mean, a lot of people are now saying that people are coming out of these universities with degrees that don't really get them anywhere. Do we need to be more radical and basically say we need to massively shrink the number of degrees that we're giving out every year? We need to close those universities or merge them and go back to a world in which, it's a more specialized thing.
I would say that, but I would couple that with funding heavily people to go and get genuine work experience and work for employers for 1, 2, 3 years, with the government playing a significant role in that, because that work experience will set them up for life and it will give them the potential to earn more in their careers. You need a dual model, right? The problem we've had is we fetishized academic education and basically assumed that the more people went to university, the greater the level of social mobility, because surely everyone would benefit from having a degree. It's just not true. And that came at the same time as rising costs in higher education meant that students were having to pay ever more and actually not just defer earnings, but take a hit to their future earnings in order to pay for it.
I mean, how did you personally come to this sort of philosophy? I mean, people would expect you to be kind of the opposite, that you were sort of born into the elite, effectively. You went to a good university, you had all these amazing contacts around you, you could go off and have done anything, I guess. Why did you come to this conclusion that actually the thrust of what you would have grown up with hearing your dad say, wasn't what you really believed in?
Well, I became obsessed with this idea that your background shouldn't define your destination. You know, I was fortunate enough to be born into these incredible circumstances. Most people aren't. Why is it that we basically make it really hard for people from lots of different walks of life to succeed? And I actually got into it by joining an organization. I cared a lot about this kind of friction between education and employment that was helping long-term unemployed people find jobs. And the challenge I found is that you could get someone a job as a bit of a sticking plaster, but keeping them in that job was really difficult because actually often you were reaching them far too late in the cycle. If you could have intervened much earlier and set them on a better path, their life circumstances would be considerably better. And the idea with apprenticeships was apprenticeship was once the way everyone learned and everyone got a job, right? An apprentice learned from a master and they were learning by doing on the job. It's very accessible. Anyone in theory can do that. And we lost that. Right, with this idea.
But how did you come to it? I mean, you didn't do an apprenticeship.
No, I didn't. But I basically looked at, well, what are the routes that you could do that would introduce people to work and learning much earlier? And how do you remove this kind of academic cliff edge? And apprenticeships were just the obvious solution at that point.
Where do you see the idea going? I mean, is this just, you know, is the business your ambition? Or do you think you might have to go bigger than that? Are you thinking politics? You know, well, not now, but I mean, you know.
No, I'm not thinking about politics. I think my family's trodden that path quite well. I think.
But is that because your family's done it, or because you don't believe politics is the way to change the world?
No, I think politics absolutely can be the way to change the world. And I think everyone knows we need great, capable people going into politics, right? There is a supply problem rather than a demand problem, as someone said quite recently. And I think for me, I'm obsessed with this idea that the changing pace of technology and the speeding up of that pace is going to leave humans behind and erode human agency if we don't equip humans to kind of meet the moment and use technology and be genuine co-pilots with it across every age and stage. I can do that running our business. We're expanding into Europe. We're now in the interesting position of helping work with the Germans on their apprenticeship and vocational system, right, which was once the kind of the centerpiece of European apprenticeships, but has struggled because they haven't kept pace with technology. And we'll soon be doing this in other parts of the world. I think education is the greatest lever we have for social mobility, but it's not pulled in the right way.
You will know, I mean, any big business, and you are a huge business now, valuation, what, 2 billion, is the focus of instant suspicion by a lot of people who believe you're basically trying to sort of turn yourself into a tech giant. You become part of that class of people who are divorced from the rest of us, and that you're using this to get rich.
Okay.
Bluntly, what is your answer to that fear, that skepticism?
Yeah. To be fair, to say, I mean, most people wouldn't assume that. I actually think most people are very comfortable with the idea of people setting up businesses, being successful, doing more. I think the question is, every business has to ask, am I a net negative for society? Am I a net neutral, or am I a net good? I'm pretty focused on trying to make it a net good by training as many people as we can so that they don't get replaced by technology but can benefit from it. I think that is an easy story to tell, right? Not every company can describe that in the same way. But we tend not to meet much resistance around what we're doing. I mean, the great thing about what we're talking about right now, rebalancing education away from academic and towards kind of applied learning, is it's pretty uncontroversial. Right, nearly everyone. You'd find everyone from Jeremy Corbyn to Zach Polanski to Nigel Farage who would say we need more apprenticeships in this country, right? And around the world, most people agree we should have more apprenticeships. The question is always how, right? And I think that is a big struggle unless you really change the way our education system operates.
And how much more government spending do you think we would need?
Well, I think you would need to take it from different areas, right? Because the reality is we don't have unlimited funds. And I said I would look at some of the higher education benefit bill. I would also look at the welfare bill, right? We are paying a lot of people not to work when we could be instead paying them for work experience. I think I know which one most people would prefer and which one leads to better outcomes.
Euan Blair, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks
Pleasure.
for sharing your ways to change the world. You can watch all of these interviews on the Channel 4 News YouTube channel. Until next time, bye-bye.